No one told you this would happen. That one day, the messages would stop. The support would fade. The people you once leaned on would disappear, not because you failed, but because you are no longer convenient. And in that silence, something terrifying begins to surface. Not weakness, not despair, but a question you can't escape. Who am I when no one is holding me up? Most people collapse at this stage. They panic. They chase reassurance. They beg the world to confirm their worth. But very few experience something different. The silence doesn't break them. It sharpens them. Because when there is no one left to save you, the psyche does something extraordinary. It reorganizes. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He knew that the strongest individuals are not formed through support, but through abandonment, through isolation, through being forced to stand alone long enough for the false self to die. If you are watching this while feeling unsupported, unseen, or forgotten, this video is not here to comfort you. It's here to explain what is actually happening inside you. Why being built alone creates a kind of strength that approval never can. Why people who survive without support become impossible to control later in life. And why this phase, however painful, may be the most important psychological initiation you will ever experience. Before we go deeper, do one quiet thing for yourself. Subscribe to this channel, not for motivation, not for noise, but for clarity. These videos are not made for everyone. They're made for those who are walking through the hard parts in silence. Now stay with me, because what you're about to understand may change the way you see your loneliness forever. There is a silent moment that defines a person long before success ever appears. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It arrives when you realize no one is coming. No rescue, no guidance, no applause. Just you, standing alone with a weight you never asked to carry. Carl Jung believed this moment was not a curse, but an initiation. Most people run from it. They call it abandonment, bad luck, unfairness. But Jung saw something darker and more powerful unfolding beneath the surface. He believed that when support is removed, the psyche is forced to reveal its true structure. Weak identities collapse. Borrowed personalities disintegrate. What remains is raw potential, unprotected and terrifying. This is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, not who you are trained to be. From childhood, most humans are conditioned to survive through attachment. Approval becomes oxygen. Validation becomes direction. The presence of others tells the mind who it is allowed to be. Jung warned that this dependence creates a fragile self, one that can only function when mirrored back by the world. When support disappears, this borrowed identity panics. Anxiety surfaces. Depression follows. But beneath that breakdown, something else stirs. The unconscious begins to speak. Old instincts awaken. Dormant strength starts pressing upward. Jung believed solitude strips away the persona, the social mask, leaving the individual face to face with the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is everything you were never allowed to express. Anger that was suppressed. Ambition that was discouraged. Power that was labeled dangerous. When you grow without support, the shadow grows louder because there is no external noise to drown it out. This is why isolation feels so intense. You are not lonely. You are being confronted by parts of yourself you are trained to ignore. Jung insisted that avoiding this confrontation leads to a life of quiet misery. But those who endure it emerge with something rare: internal authority. People who build themselves alone stop asking for permission, not because they are arrogant, but because they have learned that permission was never real. They develop an internal compass, one calibrated by failure, reflection, and survival. Jung observed that these individuals often feel older than their age, as if life accelerated their psychological development. They see through illusions quickly. They recognize manipulation. They are difficult to control because control requires dependency, and dependency no longer exists. This process is not romantic. Jung was clear about that. Solitude wounds before it strengthens. It exposes fear in its rawest form. Nights feel longer. Doubt becomes louder. The mind replays every failure, every rejection, every moment of weakness. But this is not punishment. It is purification. Jung believed the psyche, like metal, must pass through fire to be shaped. Without friction, there is no form. Without resistance, there is no identity. When external support vanishes, the unconscious compensates. Creativity increases. Intuition sharpens. Dreams become vivid. The mind starts solving problems in ways it never needed to before. You begin to rely on yourself because there is no alternative. This reliance slowly turns into trust. Not confidence borrowed from praise, but confidence earned through survival. Jung described this as the emergence of the self, the integrated whole beyond ego and fear. Those who are built alone often struggle to explain themselves to others. Their strength looks cold from the outside. Their independence is mistaken for detachment. But Jung understood that these individuals are not disconnected. They are deeply connected inward. They have faced the chaos inside and survived it. They are no longer afraid of silence, because silence is where they were forged. Society rarely celebrates this kind of strength. It prefers cooperation, conformity, and visible support systems. People who succeed alone disrupt comforting narratives. They force others to confront uncomfortable truths about dependency and avoidance. This is why truly self-made individuals are often misunderstood. Jung noted that the individuated person walks a lonely path, not because they reject others, but because few are willing to walk without guarantees. If you are building yourself without support, you are not broken. You are undergoing a psychological transformation that most people never complete. The pain you feel is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of growth. Jung believed that the greatest danger is not being alone, but never discovering who you are without the influence of others. This chapter is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to orient you, to remind you that what feels like abandonment may actually be initiation. What feels like isolation may be preparation, and what feels like weakness may be the early stages of a strength so deep it no longer needs witnesses. Built alone, the psyche enters its most dangerous territory when external support disappears. Carl Jung understood this state not as weakness, but as initiation. In isolation, the mind loses mirrors. There is no audience to confirm identity, no applause to stabilize worth, no guidance to reduce uncertainty. What remains is raw consciousness confronting itself. This confrontation is terrifying because it exposes everything that borrowed strength once concealed. Jung believed that when support vanishes, the ego is forced into dialogue with the unconscious, and this dialogue determines whether a person fragments or forges inner authority. Without support, the first collapse is illusion. The illusion that motivation must be given. The illusion that confidence arrives from praise. The illusion that direction is handed down by mentors, systems, or belonging. Jung warned that dependence on external validation infantilizes the psyche. It keeps the individual psychologically young, reactive, and easily destabilized. When support is removed, the psyche panics because it has never learned to generate its own gravity. This panic is not failure. It is the signal that growth has begun. In this stage, the unconscious retaliates. Doubt intensifies. Old fears surface. The mind produces catastrophic narratives designed to pull the individual back toward safety and dependency. Jung described this as the shadow asserting itself. The shadow is not evil. It is everything unintegrated. When support disappears, the shadow grows louder because there is no distraction suppressing it. Many people interpret this surge of negativity as proof they cannot succeed alone. Jung would say the opposite. The shadow appears because the psyche finally has space to speak. Strength without support requires the ego to stop outsourcing certainty. Jung emphasized that individuation only begins when a person stops asking who they should be and starts asking who they are. Alone, there is no script. This absence feels like emptiness, but it is actually potential. The unconscious begins offering symbols, impulses, and intuitions. These are not instructions. They are raw materials. The individual must learn discernment. Not every inner voice is truth, but every inner voice reveals something that must be understood. Jung believed that modern people fear solitude because solitude dismantles social identity. Titles, roles, reputations, and affiliations dissolve when no one is watching. What remains is character. Character is not what you display. It is what persists when reinforcement disappears. In isolation, habits reveal their true source. Discipline collapses if it was borrowed. Purpose disintegrates if it was inherited. What survives is what was genuinely internalized. The danger of this phase is regression. Many retreat back to noise, distraction, and dependency because the silence feels like annihilation. Jung warned that avoiding this confrontation leads to lifelong weakness masked as busyness. The individual becomes productive but hollow, successful but dependent, admired but internally fragmented. Strength without support cannot be rushed because the psyche must metabolize loneliness into self-trust. Jung introduced the concept of the inner authority, a psychic center that replaces external validation. This authority is not arrogance. It is alignment. It emerges when a person repeatedly acts according to inner truth, despite uncertainty. Each time action is taken without reassurance, the psyche learns it can survive its own decisions. Confidence is not an emotion. It is memory. It is the accumulated evidence that you did not collapse when no one helped. Isolation also strips away false compassion. Without support, one discovers which relationships were nourishment and which were anesthesia. Jung believed that suffering clarifies values. When energy is limited, the psyche stops wasting it on performative concern. Attention turns inward, not out of selfishness, but necessity. This inward turn is often misinterpreted as withdrawal or coldness. In reality, it is conservation. The psyche is reorganizing. Built alone, the individual begins to experience what Jung called psychic autonomy. Thoughts are no longer immediately obeyed. Emotions are no longer instantly acted upon. There is space between impulse and behavior. This space is power. Support often collapses this space by offering immediate solutions, advice, or reassurance. Alone, the individual must tolerate ambiguity. This tolerance strengthens the nervous system. The mind becomes less reactive, more deliberate. Jung also warned that strength without support requires humility. Isolation can inflate the ego if suffering is romanticized. The goal is not to become hardened, superior, or detached. The goal is integration. The individual must remain permeable to reality, while no longer dependent on it for identity. This balance is rare. Most swing between dependence and defiance. Jung's psychology aims for sovereignty. In this chapter, the absence of support is revealed not as abandonment, but as initiation. The psyche is being trained to stand without scaffolding. This training is painful because it exposes every internal weakness. Yet each exposure is an opportunity. What is faced becomes conscious. What becomes conscious can be shaped. What is shaped becomes strength. Jung believed that no one becomes whole without first becoming alone. Not forever, but long enough to hear their own voice clearly, without interference, distortion, or rescue. When a person continues forward without support, something irreversible begins to happen inside the psyche. Carl Jung believed this stage separates those who merely endure loneliness from those who transform through it. Here, isolation stops feeling like absence and starts functioning like pressure. Pressure does not destroy what is solid. It exposes what is weak and compresses what is strong into something denser, sharper, and more precise. The individual is no longer simply surviving alone. They are being restructured by it. At this point, the ego can no longer pretend. Without external reinforcement, self-deception becomes unbearable. Jung emphasized that the psyche demands honesty when stripped of distraction. Fantasies collapse. Excuses lose credibility. The mind begins turning inward with a ruthless clarity. This is not self-hatred. It is self-recognition. The individual starts seeing patterns in their failures, repetitions in their pain, and themes in their desires. What once felt random now reveals structure. This is where meaning emerges. Jung believed meaning is not discovered through comfort, but through confrontation. When support is absent, suffering becomes informative. Each emotional reaction carries data. Each frustration reveals attachment. Each fear points towards something unintegrated. Alone, the individual is forced to decode themselves. This decoding is exhausting because it removes the illusion that life is happening to them. Responsibility quietly shifts inward. Strength without support also recalibrates ambition. Goals shaped by approval begin to feel hollow. The individual senses when desire is contaminated by comparison. Jung argued that the unconscious resists inauthentic aims by draining energy from them. Projects stall. Motivation evaporates. This is not laziness. It is correction. The psyche refuses to invest in paths that do not align with the self. Alone, one learns the difference between ego hunger and soul necessity. In this stage, time feels different. Without social pacing, life loses its artificial urgency. Jung noted that isolation often slows perception. Days stretch, silence expands. This temporal shift allows deeper reflection. The individual is no longer reacting to stimuli, but observing inner movement. Thoughts rise and fall like weather. Emotions pass without immediate expression. This detachment is not numbness. It is perspective. The danger here is despair. When illusions dissolve, the void becomes visible. Many mistake this void for meaninglessness. Jung warned that the void is not empty. It is unformed. It is raw psychic material waiting for conscious shaping. Those who flee at this moment miss the threshold. Those who remain begin constructing meaning from within, rather than borrowing it from the world. Built alone, the individual starts developing symbolic awareness. Dreams intensify. Intuition sharpens. Patterns in nature, art, and language feel strangely personal. Jung believed this was the unconscious communicating through symbols rather than logic. The rational mind often dismisses this phase, but it carries guidance. Symbols bypass the ego's defenses. They point toward integration, not instruction. Here, solitude teaches discernment. Not every emotion deserves action. Not every thought deserves belief. The individual learns to sit with discomfort without converting it into drama. This capacity creates psychological gravity. Others may sense it later, but it is formed privately. Jung believed true authority is silent because it does not need validation. As inner coherence increases, the need for support diminishes naturally. This is not rejection of others. It is freedom from dependence. Relationships are no longer used to regulate mood or identity. They become choices rather than necessities. Jung saw this as a sign of maturation. The individual can now engage without losing themselves. However, this phase also reveals grief. Grief for the self that relied on others. Grief for the years spent chasing approval. Grief for identities that will never return. Jung emphasized that grief is not regression. It is integration. One must mourn what is outgrown to prevent it from haunting the future. Strength without support ultimately produces alignment. Actions begin matching values. Speech becomes simpler. Decisions feel heavier but cleaner. There is less explanation, less justification. The individual no longer needs to convince others because they are no longer trying to convince themselves. Jung described this as living from the center rather than the surface. By the end of this chapter of development, solitude no longer feels hostile. It feels neutral, even grounding. The individual has built an inner structure capable of holding uncertainty. They are no longer waiting to be rescued or recognized. They are prepared to re-enter the world without surrendering themselves to it. Jung believed this readiness marks the transition from survival to sovereignty. There comes a moment when the individual who is built alone no longer feels defined by the absence of support. What once felt like deprivation now reveals itself as initiation. Carl Jung understood this final phase not as triumph, but as return. A return to the world, yes, but on different terms. The person who emerges is not hardened, not superior, not invulnerable. They are integrated. Integration is the quiet victory. It is when the fragmented parts of the psyche stop competing for control and begin cooperating. The wounded child, the fearful ego, the ambitious mask, the hidden shadow, none are destroyed. They are acknowledged, positioned, and given limits. Jung believed wholeness does not mean purity. It means containment. The individual can now hold contradiction without collapse. At this stage, loneliness changes texture. It no longer feels sharp. It becomes spacious. The person can be alone without feeling abandoned, and can be with others without feeling diluted. This is psychological independence. Not isolation, not rebellion, but inner sufficiency. The world is no longer required to confirm existence. Existence is already felt. Power now moves differently. It is no longer reactive. There is less urgency to prove, explain, or dominate. Jung warned that unconscious power always seeks expression through compulsion. Integrated power expresses itself through restraint. The strongest individuals are often the least visible because they are not driven by lack. They do not need attention to stabilize their sense of self. This is where purpose becomes subtle. No grand mission announces itself. Instead, there is a quiet sense of rightness. Certain actions feel aligned. Certain paths feel closed without bitterness. Jung described this as the self exerting a gentle gravitational pull. Life organizes itself around what matters, not what impresses. The individual now understands why support was removed. Not as punishment, not as cruelty, but as necessity. External scaffolding had to fall for the internal structure to form. Jung believed the psyche evolves through tension. Without tension, there is no differentiation. Without differentiation, there is no individuality. Support would have softened the pressure required for transformation. There is compassion now, not performative compassion, but earned empathy. Having stood alone, the individual recognizes silent battles in others. Judgment fades. Comparison loses interest. Jung noted that those who have integrated their shadow are less tempted to project it. They do not need enemies to define themselves. Yet this stage is not bliss. Doubt still visits. Fear still whispers. The difference is relationship. The individual no longer confuses emotions with commands. Fear can exist without ruling. Doubt can appear without paralyzing. The psyche has learned internal dialogue rather than internal war. Re-entering society becomes an act of choice. The individual participates without surrender. They can navigate systems without becoming them. Jung believed this was the ethical responsibility of the individuated person, to remain inwardly free while outwardly engaged, not to withdraw permanently, but to contribute without losing the self. The final test is subtle. The world may now offer support, recognition, even admiration. This is where many regress. Jung warned that success can be more dangerous than failure. It tempts the ego to rebuild dependency on external validation. The integrated individual must accept support without feeding identity from it. Use it, but do not drink from it. What remains is a quiet authority, a grounded presence, a sense that life is being lived from the inside out. The individual no longer asks, "Who am I allowed to be?" They ask, "What is true for me now?" And they listen carefully for the answer. This is not the end of struggle. It is the end of unconscious struggle. The war against the self has ceased. The long conflict between inner truth and outer demand has reached truce. Jung believed this was the closest modern individuals come to wisdom. Not knowledge, not certainty, but coherence. Strength without support does not produce heroes. It produces real people. People who can stand alone without needing to stand above. People who can connect without disappearing. People who carry their center with them, regardless of environment. And so the individual moves forward, not loudly, not dramatically, but intact. The world may never know what was endured. That no longer matters. The work was never about being seen. It was about becoming whole. This is what it means to be built alone. Not abandoned by life, but shaped by it. Not emptied, but clarified. Not broken, but forged inwardly, where no applause reaches and no support is guaranteed. And that is enough. If this resonated, stay. Not for answers, but for depth. There is more beneath the surface, and we explore it together.